Thank you for joining me on this extra special episode of Spoiled by Beth. Why is it extra special? Because it marks the 1-year anniversary of my channel. How exciting is that? I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed doing it. In honor of this momentous occasion, I figured I'd bring a little something back, and that is the Halloween-themed October. And with that, I figured I'd start with a pretty special Halloween book by the Queen herself. No, not the Queen Bee. No, not the Queen of Suspense, but the queen of one of the best literary ghost stories ever. And that would be Shirley Jackson and The Haunting of Hill House. If you've never heard of it, let me give you a little background. First off, there's like 3 movies. No, I think there's 2 movies and a Netflix show, so go check them out if you want. Of course, they're not true to the book, but are you ever going to be true to the book? No. The other, and this is what drew me to this book, was Rose Red by Stephen King. I am not a huge Stephen King fan just because I think he's a little bit more gory and grotesque than he is scary. But the guy's got chops. The dude knows how to write. And so I have read a couple of his things, and I will eventually do reviews on them. But I'm not even talking about a book of his. I'm talking about the miniseries he did in, I think, early 2000s. If you've ever seen Rose Red, then this story is not going to be new to you. That was enjoyable for me to see the elements from this book incorporated into that miniseries. But before I go further, I should probably tell you what the book is about. It's a haunted house story / maybe ghost story, although I think the genius behind it is you never know if it's truly haunted, like if there's really a ghost to it. It's more psychological than physical, which is different from Rose Red, because Rose Red is a haunted house. There are ghosts there that do terrible things. In Hill House, what happens is this doctor named Dr. Montague has heard about the strange things that have happened at this house. And so he wants to find out for himself, is it really haunted? He invites a number of people who have experienced the paranormal, and then the owners of the house throw in one of their own for reasons unbeknownst to me. I guess maybe they just want someone to make sure that he and his posse are not going to tear things apart. They come together at this house, experience strange things, and then there you go. Not interesting yet. Before I get into a few more details, I do have to say, this is a book that makes me truly wonder if my opinion means anything at all. Because Stephen King essentially swears by this book, and I was not impressed. I will say the atmosphere that she creates is incredible. Like, the moments where you're not sure if it's real or not real, the moments where she just makes it a really creepy house, and then she adds in the mysterious death elements, or the tragic elements, or even the creepy people elements, and you're just like, ooh, what's gonna happen next? But then she adds in, essentially, for me, the biggest problem was their narrator, and her name is Eleanor. Throughout the book, you're not really sure if Eleanor is truly telekinetic, telepathic, psychic, if she really has some kind of supernatural ability, or if she's just cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. My personal opinion, she is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I think part of what is supposed to create her character is that she had to take care of a very overbearing mother. In the very beginning, we get a glimpse of her sister, and so you just get a sense that everybody in her family is just kind of negative towards her. They don't really make her feel like she's worthwhile. So after a while, anybody is going to have poor self-esteem. So I think she just internalized so much that she went crazy, and then coming into this spooky house, she just let it get to her. That's not necessarily the problem I have with her, because I'm okay with guessing what is real with what Eleanor is experiencing and what is not real with what Eleanor is experiencing. My problem with her is she's almost childlike in many ways, and those are the ways which are not helped by the narration. I think it's actually quite incredible. This narrator, on the whole, not bad. But then when she does Eleanor, it's like nails on a chalkboard, where she's so childlike, and then it adds to kind of the childlike nature of her behavior. I just want to gouge my eyes out. I cannot stand Eleanor. I cannot stand the way that the narrator reads her. But let's get back to Eleanor a little bit. There's just so many places. Alright, so Dr. Montague invites all of these people to the house, and 2 show up, which gets to this point for me where I'm like, what's the point of the story? If this guy is so well regarded within his profession, why are people saying no to him? Because the people who show up, Eleanor and Theodora, they've never even heard of this house. So it's not like people are too scared to come to this house. Why even introduce to us the fact that he invited a multitude of people and only 2 agreed to show up? So he invites them because they have attachments to the paranormal. But only Eleanor really is explained as to what kind of experience she's had. Theodora, I'm just like, anyways. But so that's Eleanor, where she, apparently in her youth, and this goes to Rose Red, she may or may not have caused rocks to fall from the sky. Still, what kind of ability that is, I have no idea, but we get the sense that she's sensitive. They all get to this house, and this is my first issue. Eleanor, I think this is hilarious, and this is where I thought I was gonna like her, and then in the end, I mean, it didn't even take long for me to not like her, but she gets an invite, and this is like the 1950s, okay? So not everybody has cars. So she had gone in on a car with her sister and brother-in-law, and the brother-in-law is like, well, I mean, what's wrong with her taking this car? Because she'd essentially be gone all summer, which I would be like, why are you taking a car that you're sharing with other people that they can't use? Like, find another way to get there. Anyways, so she's arguing with them. The brother-in-law's like, you know, maybe it's not a bad idea that she takes it. And the sister's like, I don't think so. Like, that's our car. We don't trust you with it. So that's kind of a first red flag. Why would they not trust Eleanor? Is it because Eleanor's not trustworthy, or is it because the sister's too overbearing and doesn't want to share a car that they went in it together with? Eleanor, go girl, go. She steals the car. And she's driving past this field of oleander, and she's just like imagining this massive like daydream about oleander, and she'd passed this other house, and she was like, oh, I could live in a house like that, and I could have this huge field of oleander. So this was my first red flag, that something was wrong with Eleanor, because we had this whole diatribe of flower talk, okay? So then she stops by a diner, and in the letter, Dr. Montague had been like, don't ask anybody about this house. Like, it's just not a good idea. So she doesn't bring it up per se, but she tries to wheedle information out of a patron and the waitress. You're kind of getting a feel for this house as you're getting up there. And so she finally drives up, and she encounters the super creepy caretaker, Mr. Dudley, who he and his wife are my 2 favorite characters, and I don't think they get near enough airtime. And so then he gives her a whole lot of crap about showing up at this house. He finally lets her through, and she is like, I don't want to be here. Mrs. Dudley leads her upstairs to her room, and she's like, I'm really scared. I don't think I want to be here. And she's about to jet when Theodora shows up. And now Eleanor, if you can't tell, she's not a people person, all right? And so she's like, oh, someone's here. So I'm like, all right, I'm with it, because if I'm scared, it's nice to have another person there. And Mrs. Dudley she's not a comrade. She's not a friend. She's not going to be someone who's going to kiss it, make it better. And so I can't understand her excitement about someone else showing up at a house where you're super creeped out. But she's like, best friends forever at first sight. And Theodora's like, wow, you're really friendly. And then Eleanor's like, why am I being so friendly? And literally, that's how she talks. That's how the narrator makes her talk. And you get all of these little personal thoughts of Eleanor's, and then the narration pulls back to almost a third person omniscient. So I don't care for the way it's written. I don't care for little moments where we get Eleanor's thoughts because I thought they were necessary. But then finally Dr. Montague and Luke, who is the heir, the family member who is supposed to be at this house with them, they show up and they're all like, you know, sipping brandy in the library or whatever. It's very Clue-like, you know, Colonel Mustard in the library with the wrench. And they're like, we need to introduce ourselves. So they play this stupid game. Well, I'm not wearing the red sweater, so I can't be Eleanor. I must be Theodora. And then Dr. Montague's like, well, I have a beard, which means I can't be Luke, which means I have to be Dr. Montague. And Eleanor's like, well, I am wearing the red sweater. On one hand, I'm kind of okay with it because it's narrowing down the field of who's who. But once we've established who Eleanor and Theodora are, and then who one of the guys is, like, do we have to have the fourth member, that second guy, be like, well, then this is me? We figured that out by now. At this point, it's almost like they're not talking to the reader anymore. They're just being stupid. Like, I did not, this was outside of that little stupid oleander monologue. I could not stand this scene. I thought it was the dumbest, most boring, useless bit of information. Why did they have to go to this whole stupid little name game? I just don't get it. The story keeps going on, and it's really slow. The most interesting aspects really were when you're trying to determine, is the house haunted or not? These are the elements that could have made it haunted, like the guy who built it for his family, for his wife, as a place that they could live forever and all of their family could stay in, and just for generations and generations, it could stay in the family and just be this place, you know? And as soon as they get there, the wife dies. Stuff happens. He gets married again, and he leaves his two daughters there with their nanny or whatever, and he goes abroad, and almost immediately the wife dies again. And then I mean, that's either the second or third wife. So the first wife dies upon arrival, their second wife dies from something, and then the third wife dies. So I'm like, is this the reason it's haunted? Is it haunted because the first wife died and she never got to experience it? Like, we really get no clear explanation as to who the haunter actually might be. And then there's this whole thing of Theodora is just so sad about the fact that the daughters basically got left behind, and how there's at this house all by themselves. So I'm thinking, is there going to be a murder? Is there going to just be something bad? Like, you know, like, what's gonna happen? The sisters are still fighting, and the one sister who lost is like, well, you got the house, so, like, this and this and this belong to me, and she never gets it. So there's this long legal battle. Eventually, the one sister who lives in the house dies, and then the other sister is like, well, the house belongs to me, even though my sister left it, or this local girl has rights to it or something. And then the local girl ends up going crazy because I think we're led to assume that the remaining sister drove her mad by making her think things were there that really weren't, and because she was constantly on top of her, she was like, this is mine, and this is mine, and you know, this, like, these things belong to me, like, you have no rights. And so eventually the girl's like, I can't handle it anymore, I'm a crackpot, and so she leaves, and so that was all really interesting, but in a way, it had no purpose. One of the big items that the sisters fought over was a set of dishes. We never know what happened to the dishes. in the end, they have no purpose. So the nursery, though, is this big deal because there's a cold spot, even though no thermometer will ever gauge that the temperature has changed. So I'm like, well, what's wrong with the nursery? What happened in the nursery to make the nursery a cold spot, a spot of intrigue? There's just all these little things that make the house mysterious and ghostly and almost make the book worth it. But for me, in the end, I was like, so what? Well, what was the purpose of any of that? There are just some other little things that happen. There's one in particular where I was very confused about this. Theodora and Eleanor. So one thing about Eleanor is she just becomes super attached to Theodora to the point where she's like, when all this is over, I'm gonna come live with you. And Theodora's like, excuse me? There was no invitation, okay? So no. Eleanor's like, oh, well, she must not like me and I don't like her anymore. Like, very childlike. It's ridiculous, okay? I mean, I think Eleanor's, I didn't quite listen properly. She's either in her mid-20s or her mid-30s. She's a grown woman, okay? And so she's like, oh, I don't like Theodora. I want nothing to do with Theodora. And there had been an incident in which words had been written in blood in Theodora's room and it had gotten all over her clothes. So now Theodora is living in Eleanor's room and wearing Eleanor's clothes. And Eleanor's like, oh, why is she wearing my clothes? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, have they never heard of bleach? Did they ever go back into that room to see if the writing and the blood was still there? Because it's never determined whether it's blood or red paint. These are just instances that I was really confused about. Because is it the house? Is it someone playing tricks? Because the house was built, not necessarily a maze per se, but it wasn't built with solid right angles. Everything was just a bit skewed, which means that like doors might not necessarily stay open because they're not like this. They're more like on an incline, I guess you could say. They're just, so, you know, if people are walking, if a breeze blows, like they're just off-centered, so they might close on their own. And so those are the things where, you know, because Montague explains this to them. And so we're like, is it ghostly or is it just engineering? For me, I'm wondering, the writing on the wall, somebody trying to scare them, is it the Dudleys or is it real? There really are a lot of good questions posed psychologically to make you unsure as to the truth. But did nobody go back into that room to see if it was still there? I would have. I mean, yes, I would have scared witless, but I would have been like, was it my imagination or wasn't it? This all goes back to saying Eleanor and Theodora are not on the best of terms. And for some reason, they decide to go walking at night. This was what I was unclear about, what time of day it was. On Wikipedia, it says they're walking at night, which makes this little family picnic they stumble across that much creepier because, yes, like, if it's a ghostly picnic, it's much more obvious that it's ghostly at night than during the day. But anyway, so they're just walking. I don't know why they don't like each other, and it really makes no sense as to why they're walking at night. They stumble across this ghostly picnic, and then Theodora screams, and she's like, Eleanor, we gotta run. We don't know why she screams. We don't know what she saw. There's no explanations. There's just all those little things where I'm like, what was the point? King, if you ever watch this video, why did you like it so much? Please explain to me all of these elements that you thought made this story so great. I mean, I love the concept behind the book that Jackson wanted a pure ghost story. She wanted a haunted house. And so I thought it was an admirable effort, but I didn't like the characters. For the most part, I didn't like the writing because I thought it was really confusing. Like, structurally, we were first person. And then we were third person. Why we needed to be in Eleanor's head at certain points I thought didn't make sense. It was overkill. I would have related to her better or connected to her better if I didn't get these simpering little thoughts of hers. If maybe she'd been more of a mystery to me. If we had had more ghostly aspects, more tragedy, things to explain why the house might be haunted. If we'd had more of the Dudleys. I'm just saying, these people were fantastic. Because Eleanor, I told you, she gets to the house and Mr. Dudley's like, no, you're not coming in here. And so at first I'm like, dude, Mr. Dudley, give her a break, all right? He was our first red flag. He was our first warning sign, like, do not enter. And then we get nothing from him. And then Eleanor gets into the house and meets Mrs. Dudley, and she's not friendly. And she's like, we don't stay overnight. I come in the morning and you have to be done eating by 10 because that's when I clear things away. And then I come back at 6 to do dinner and then I'm leaving. So just leave your dirty dishes on the sideboard because as I said, I don't stay overnight. She's kind of a hot mess and you just love her for it because you're like, Mrs. Dudley, what is wrong with you? But anytime you ask her a question, she's like, we don't stay at night. Breakfast is at 8. Oh, you're still sitting at the table? I clear at 10. I love her. I love those two. And part of me, I'm just pretending they're ghosts, okay? They're not real people. They are the dead bodies of servants who served, I don't know, the original owners of the house and they just stuck around. I'm just kind of trying to create more mystique and more interest for this book because it was boring. I was at work and I was working in the back where I could listen to my own thing and I was so angry while I was working. I was like, don't bother me, like don't talk to me, because this book put me in such a bad mood. It was so boring and it was such a waste of my time. So I just started skipping because, as I said, I'm not a huge Stephen King fan. I know he's a good writer, but with his fame, he gets away with a lot. And that means he can do a 10-page description on woods. How boring is that? And that is what Shirley Jackson does. It's probably because it's literary fiction and I'm not a literary fiction kind of lady. And so that is just what they do. They say a lot without saying anything just to create atmosphere, to build setting, to, you know, make us think they're smart. And so they were just, eventually I was like, there's no pertinent information here. All these weird things that are happening are never getting explained, so I'm just gonna skip ahead until something exciting happens. And so I can leave Eleanor, I could leave Theodora, I could leave Luke, I could kind of leave Dr. Montague. As I said, love the Dudleys. And so just when I'm gonna die from boredom, like literally, I am just ready to chuck it all. Mrs. Montague shows up. We knew from the very beginning that Mrs. Montague was gonna show up. And I guess part of being in this house means they lost all track of time. And so they're like, when is Mrs. Montague going to come? And Mr. Montague is like, well, I think it's on this certain day. But I'm not quite sure, because I don't know what day we're on. But blah, 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 blah. So then, you know, they're eating dinner. And Mrs. Montague shows up, and she's like, you couldn't wait to save dinner for me? And Mr. Montague is like, well, we didn't know when you were going to show up. I was going to show up on this day. You knew that. And it's like, but I didn't know what time you were going to show up. And so she had come with this gentleman friend of hers. First off, I'm like, they're totally having an affair, okay? Like, Arthur and Mrs. Montague are having an affair. She's like, who are all of these people with you? And so Mr. Montague introduces her to all of them. And she's like, you couldn't have done proper introductions? And then she's talking about Luke. Can that young man take my things or our things up to our rooms? Because Arthur shouldn't be doing it. And it's like, you just were told his name. And then she's like, we don't want to leave our car outside at night. Where can we put it? Mr. Montague is like, dude, we have a policy. We don't go out there at night. And Arthur's like, oh, you talking about Luke. He's like, oh, you're a scaredy cat. Like, you're not a man because you won't go outside at night. Mr. Montague, Professor Montague is like, if you want to go out there, if you want to move your car to the bar and, like, go for it, we're staying here. And then Mrs. Montague's like, I want, and I have no idea what she does, all right? No idea what her profession is. No idea what her qualifications are. All I get the sense of is she loves the paranormal, and so she is here with her Ouija board and her all of her crackpot nonsense. And so she's like, I want the most haunted room in the house. So they take her upstairs to the nursery. She doesn't feel the cold spot at all. She's like, this room, did you not air it out for me? You knew I was coming. She cracks me up, right? So Dr. Montague is like, well, I told Mrs. Dudley to open the windows. And so I'm thinking, the room can't air out because it's haunted. And Mrs. Montague's like, why would you put me in this room? Like, it's the worst room in the house. Didn't you just want the creepiest room in the house? Sometimes you gotta take the good with the bad, you know? So that's just how the story goes, where Mrs. Montague is super bossy, super bratty. And the other cast of characters are like, we hate her. When are she and Arthur leaving? Like, they're such nuisances. And so I quite enjoyed Mrs. Montague. Arthur, I thought, was a pain. Completely unnecessary, except for being a bit stuffy and uppity. He really added nothing because it's the 1950s. He was essentially the only reason that Mrs. Montague could get to Hill House. Because she doesn't drive at night. Personally, if I were Dr. Montague, I'd be like, why are you hanging out with another man? I would have driven you, you know? Like, he can leave the house. The story didn't make sense to me. I mean, the book did not make sense to me. It did not interest me. Please, I'm begging you, if you've read this book, tell me why you liked it. Because obviously it's a classic. I loved how it was based off of houses like the Winchester house, which, if you know anything about it, basically the Winchester rifle, like those guys, that family, you know, he builds this house, he dies, his wife goes cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and she's like, the only way the voices are gonna leave me alone is if I use my entire fortune to build a house that I'm never gonna finish. I love the elements and the inspirations behind this book, but if you really want to enjoy this book, just watch Rose Red. It's on YouTube. It's a much more satisfying tale of ghosts and strange doings, and it will gross you out, it will creep you out, it will make you want to leave the light on when you're sleeping. This book, on the other hand, it will just make you want to go to sleep. Actually, the big thing is, in the end, super spoiler, Eleanor, as I said, I don't think she has any supernatural ability. I think she's just crazy. And I think being rejected by Theodora had a huge impact on her. So she was like, where can I call home? Where do I belong? I belong at this house. Because she starts to think that the house is talking to her. So ergo, she belongs there. And she literally goes crazy. I think we're supposed to wonder if she's actually inhabited by some other ghost, but it's like we are getting her perspective, but she's outside of herself. So it's like she's not the one who's actually knocking on everybody's doors and doing these really weird things. It's something that's inhabited her body. But what she does is I think she ends up on the roof. It was really confusing for me. I was so bored that I kind of skipped certain things. So I think that's where she ends up. All I know is she is like, I'm gonna scare people by knocking on doors, and they're not gonna know it's me. They're gonna think it's a ghost, but really it's not me. It's really, really weird. And then somebody realizes she's not in the room she's sharing with Theodora. Hello, have we thought this through? And so she runs away from them, and she ends up on the roof or wherever it is, and everybody's freaked out. She comes back to herself, and she's like, I don't want to die, I don't want to fall off the roof, I'm not gonna jump, and help me, and so they get her off, and Dr. Montague's like, lady, you need professional help. I can't keep you here anymore. You can't stay here. And so they send her packing, and she gets in this stolen car, and she's leaving, and it's like she's re-inhabited by whatever force had overtaken her, and she's like, I know one way that I can never leave, and I know a way that they'll regret treating me this way, because she's just imagining them watching her from the windows. Like, you know, they said goodbye, but as soon as they went back in the house, that's when they stopped caring. So she's like, I know they're all in the house and they don't care. I know a way to make them care. So she drives into a tree, which is how the first wife had died right before she hits the tree. She's like, what am I doing? And she dies. I mean, we're assuming she dies. We don't really know. I'm gonna say she dies, and she goes to haunt this house along with all the other non-ghostly entities. And there we go. And we're over. Yeah, there it is. I know it was kind of confusing at first. I had to catch my footing, if you will. But it's not a book I recommend. I would recommend it in a literary sense. If you want to see how somebody wrote a classic ghost story, a ghost story that has spawned 2 movies, a miniseries, and a Netflix show, a ghost story that Stephen King swears by, yeah, do it. If you are reading it hoping to be scared, hoping to get freaked out, hoping for a good mystery ghost story, this isn't going to do it for you. It's just not. Unless you like literary fiction, then give it a shot. No. I'd rather read Twilight. I hope you enjoyed this review. It went a lot differently than I'd expected it would, but I'm glad that I found something to enjoy from it. So I hope to see you next time for another spooky review. Bye.